Guitar Solo Countdown.
Hey everybody, welcome to Jimmy Wolf's Guitar Solo Countdown. Today we're going to look at our 5 favorite albums from one of the greatest prog rock bands of all time, King Crimson. And I know Matt has just a ton of knowledge about this band, so why don't you start, give us a bit of an introduction about Crimson, and then we'll get into our top 5.
Cool. An introduction on Crimson. That's tougher than most bands. So it's kind of like a traveling circus band, right? You got almost a totally different lineup every time a record comes out. Started in 1968 and have been releasing records, from that point until now, right? A band that's legitimately kept it going, making new records for 50 years, basically. But yeah, they're a funny band. You've got one guy kind of holding it together. I think in a previous discussion we mentioned they've got sort of this Megadeth thing going. The one guy sort of as the shepherd of the band, and then these wonderful revolving groups that come in to make a record or 3 at a time. And just for him to tear it all down and start it all over again. And I think that's part of what makes it interesting, because, you're dealing with a different band essentially on every record. So you're getting this totally fresh thing, which usually worked out well for them. It was like a different style with every band, you could say.
Yep.
And they did manage to keep some bands together for 3 albums in the 70s they did with the same band, and then 3 albums in the 80s they did with the same band. But at the end of the day, it's really all about sort of Robert Fripp's vision and his constant need to evolve the band. In the 90s, it became this strange double trio thing with 2 drummers, 2 bass players, 2 guitar players, which was very strange. But not strange for King Crimson. They're just built different.
And they weren't even basses, they were like sticks.
Yes, stick bass, which the Chapman stick. I'm still not 100% sure what one of those is, and I've seen them, and I'm still not totally sure what it is.
Yeah.
I know that Tony Levin is very good at one.
Yep. Yeah, well, that's a great introduction. Yeah, that's exactly what I would have said too. It's just this kind of musical collective with Robert Fripp being the shepherd, or being the sun that everyone orbits around at different times.
It's a little culty,
It is, and especially Robert when he would talk in interviews in the 70s, it was very odd. He had a very, very unique way of talking.
Yeah, he's a peculiar guy, very eccentric, very intelligent fella, clearly, but Robert's off, but in a kind of a nice way. I like his bent, as they say.
Yeah, I forget if we touched on this last podcast, but Jim, have you seen his newest YouTube videos with his wife?
We didn't touch on that, and yes, I have, with Toya Wilcox.
Yeah,
it's kind of awesome, and it's really neat to see a guy like Robert being kind of relevant, because he's always gone out of his way to not be, in a way. It's like if King Crimson get too popular, it almost seems like Fripp gets mad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is special for special people. Don't you dare, don't you dare like my band. So to see him on YouTube, gloating in all the accolades, it's neat. I don't know. It's strange watching Robert Fripp play out like Smells Like Teen Spirit with his wife. Strange thing.
Yeah. All right, Maddie. Well, do you want to let's start the countdown? You want to go with your 5th?
All right.
Yeah.
Brought props.
All right.
Number 5 for me.
Boom.
Discipline. This one was a bit tricky for me to pick. Honestly, it was between this one and another one of the 80s records, 3 of a Perfect Pair, which I also really enjoy. And I think maybe 3 of a Perfect Pair even has a couple of the sort of stronger songs on it, but as a record, Discipline is the one. It's solid. It's very different for Crimson. It's full on 80s. Sounds like the 80s. There's synth guitars on it, electric drums, the whole nine. but it's so solid. Every song on it I enjoy. Maybe Elephant Talk would be my least favorite on the record, and that's maybe the most popular song on it. But yeah, the production on it's quirky, the sounds are weird, the songwriting is really quite good for like straight 80s pop. And yeah, there's just something about Discipline. Of those 3 records in the 80s, I think it was the best one they did. And just to sort of explain that, they made 3 records starting in, I believe it was 81, 82 or 83, and then another one in 84 with the same lineup. And that was after a break of 6 or 7 years of no albums and no band at all. And this was the final, this was the first, of those records to come out in 1981. And yeah, amazing record. The drumming on it, Billy Bruford, just fantastic.
Killer. Yeah, no, he was probably one of the longest lasting members besides Fripp.
Besides Fripp, yeah. I mean, he did the whole 70s tour, and then he did the whole 80s tour. So he was in the band for, I think he might have been, was he the drummer on Thrack as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so he did like 7 records in a row, which certainly would put him right after Fripp for most consecutive appearances with King Crimson.
Yep.
I don't think anyone else has lasted even close to that long, honestly. 3 records here, 4 records there, maybe. And even those guys tend to dip in and out.
Yep. It's a great pick, Matt. It's a killer record. Still sounds futuristic today.
It does. I literally just gave it a spin there, I guess a couple of weeks ago, and I was surprised. I was surprised at how like modern it still sounds. It's a very clean sounding record, which kind of also goes against, Crimson always had good sounding records, but they were pretty gnarly sounding.
Yeah.
And the 80s records are very, crystalline and 80s sounding, very high quality production. And yet it still has a quirkiness to it. It still sounds like, yeah, I believe this is King Crimson. It's still odd enough.
Now, you know what album inspired that sound, as far as I know, is the 3rd Peter Gabriel album.
That would make a ton of sense.
Yes.
Is the 3rd record the one he did with no cymbals on the record?
Yes.
It is. Okay. Because that's one thing you definitely notice with the 80s Crimson is that there's a lot of percussion. You hear Billy Bruford using a lot of the 80s drum sounds of the time with acoustic drum sounds, and there's not a lot of cymbals. Yeah. It's a pretty dry record for the 80s. Like there's not a ton, everything's not soaked in reverb, which again, Gabriel kind of liked to do, where like the reverb is much more a feature, and when you use it, it's used for a purpose rather than just spreading it across the mix, and every single drum and guitar has 100 pounds of reverb on it. And I definitely hear that on those 80s King Crimson records. I feel like they were really, listening to it, it sounds to me like they were listening to a lot of Peter Gabriel and a lot of Talking Heads.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think Robert Fripp actually produced the 2nd Peter Gabriel album.
I do believe he did.
So that's kind of interesting.
He also produced a record with David Byrne of the Talking Heads.
Well, there you go.
So
it's Gabriel and the Talking Heads mashed up.
Exactly. I feel like, and he was doing that sort of in that dead air era of King Crimson during the late 70s, when he was also, he was producing records for David Bowie, playing on records with Bowie and Byrne. And so, you can really hear how he was bored with the 70s prog thing. Then he spent a little bit of time with these guys and then decided, hey, let's put a band together and kind of do that.
Yes.
And it's surprisingly admirable how well he did it. They're good records, and they really do a good job of being 80s, but also being prog rock, being super interesting. The addition of, oh my goodness gracious. Help me out here, James. Adrian Belew.
Oh, yep.
Really cool. And again, another guy taken right out of Bowie's band, I believe, right?
Yes. And before that, Frank Zappa's band.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So,
He was well suited to be Fripp's kind of
Time.
sidekick.
Yeah, like, oh, you spent time with Zappa, so you're used to being told exactly how things are going to be.
Well, there's that.
Come join my band.
Yeah. He is very. There is a lot of parallels between Robert Fripp and Zappa.
100%. I think Zappa had a more American sense of humor.
Oh yeah.
So he was a little easier to digest than Fripp, because Fripp's humor is, he thinks it's funny. I mean, I think it's funny, but that's only because, I've watched the guy for so long that I've gotten used to him. But he's not quite as amiable, I don't think, as Zappa. Zappa seems like he'd be a little bit more fun, maybe just as taskmastery, but not quite as like hard to understand. But definitely very similar sort of like obsessive minds who kind of need to control every element.
Oh yeah. Yep. All right, Matt. So I'm going to go with my fifth choice. This was really hard for me because I felt like I was disrespecting all the albums that didn't make it on the list. So I was struggling. So there's three albums that like they're all fairly equal, but I had to pick one of them to be five. So I went with the one that I tend to listen to more as I get older. And I thought it is the underdog for sure of the discography. So I picked Islands.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. A little, that was my other choice for five.
Awesome.
For me, it came down to Discipline and Islands. I love Islands. It's a great record.
Yeah, it's like one of those albums where it's supposed to be underrated because it's not a giant musical loud statement, right? It's very subtle.
So subtle. There's a 6-minute piece of straight classical music.
Yes.
Song for Girls, which is like just legit straight string arrangement.
Yep.
I don't think there's a member of King Crimson on that song.
It's awesome though, but it totally works.
Great.
And it's so pleasant to listen to, and
beautiful piece of music.
Yep. I love Boz's voice on this album. I think it totally fits the mellowness of the whole thing. And
he's I mean, for me, Boz might be my second favorite Crimson vocalist behind Greg Lake.
Yeah.
He kind of did the Greg Lake thing. And you might even argue that he's got a little bit more of a like pro voice. I mean, terrible way to put it, but he's got such a recordable voice.
Yeah.
Songs like Ladies of the Road on that record, like his voice sounds awesome. Sounds powerful. And then he does all these crazy Beatles harmonies in the chorus and stuff. It's funny, actually, I threw on, because I was trying to kind of decide yesterday between Discipline and Islands, which one makes it. And so I listened to Islands, and I haven't in a while. And immediately I was sort of like, oh yeah, I remember why I like this record. And I'll tell you one of the big reasons I love this record, Mel Collins, just a beast. He probably the unsung hero, actually, for me of King Crimson is Mel Collins. Saxophone player. I think he does some other instruments here and there. Mostly he's on either an alto or a tenor sax. And man, he brings this record for me into a whole another stratosphere. Songs like is it Formentera Lady?
Yes.
Leads off the record.
That's the lead song. Yep.
Yeah, he comes ripping into that song, and the sax just sort of takes the song to another level. And he does that in a lot of songs on this record, where he just like, soon as you hear the sax line, you're like, oh damn, yeah, here we go. He's just got this attitude in his playing, and there were so many moments on that record where the sax just takes over for me. The production on this record is also very good on Islands. It's a very good sounding record. Again, you've got a whole different band. You got Boz, I believe, once again, for the second record in a row, it was Robert teaching a guy who didn't know how to play bass so that he could be the singer bass player, because he wanted a singer bass player. So Boz, I don't even believe, played bass at the time. And then, of course, went on to be the bass player in Bad Company, which is pretty amazing.
Which is, probably like the biggest band of the 70s, eh?
Like, and he just, Robert teaches him how to play bass, says sing on one record, and then he's like, oh, I guess I'm a bass player now, and then goes and joins arguably one of the biggest, stadium rock bands of the 70s. and has a wonderful career doing so. And no one even remembers the dude was in King Crimson, right? He's known for being in Bad Company, even though he was the lead singer, bass player on that record.
But it is a great thing to have on your resume, though.
Damn right.
Yeah.
Although I'd say about half the British musicians of the age all have it on their resume that they were in. I mean, even guys like Elton John tried out.
Really?
Yeah, Elton John tried out for I want to say it was the first record. He wanted to be the lead singer before they found Greg Lake.
Wow.
Elton went in and auditioned to be in King Crimson.
That's incredible.
So yeah, there's very few people that were British musicians in the 60s and 70s who don't have some sort of tie, just for the sheer amount of people that were in the band.
I'd make a wager that Elton John and Robert Fripp wouldn't get along for very long.
I don't think so. A couple of big personalities there.
Oh yeah.
Although I'm sure, like, with the way Robert is, like, he, as much as he's a control guy, he loves when guys come in and bring something. So, you know, you can make the argument that, yeah, he wouldn't have lasted long, but they probably would have made like a great record together. Probably only one.
Probably one, yep.
That's the Fripp way, you know? But yeah, I'm really glad you picked Islands, because I felt like it was a shame that maybe that wouldn't get mentioned if you didn't put it in your list. And I was thinking, like, like Sailor's Tale, the instrumental on it, I think is one of my favorite little pieces of King Crimson. The drums on, and actually another thing to mention, the drummer on this record, who again only did the one record, and he's great. Everyone on the record is really great.
Yep.
And yeah, the instrumental, which we were talking about the other day, Robert and his weird guitar solos, Sailor's Tale has one of the, I remember when I was younger, I used to find it frustrating. Now I love it.
Yeah.
Straight chord solo.
Well, the vibe I get on this whole album is I get a bit of a sea vibe, or like there's a lot of references to water, like Sailor's Tale, Song of the Falls, Islands, even.
Islands.
And when I hear that guitar solo, it kind of feels like they've
Choppy Water.
Choppy Water, yeah.
Yeah.
And the strings too, right? The strings has a very flowy water feel.
That's true, yeah, and all that sort of
strings in this album.
Layered mellotron to blend as well, right? Which is one of Robert's sort of major affectations of that era, was to take mellotrons and blend those mellotron strings in. And then, of course, on this record, he actually brings in a lot of real strings to blend with the mellotron, which is really cool. Yeah. And yeah, heavily featured on this record, the strings.
Now, could this be a symbol, Islands, of Robert Fripp and his career being lost at sea, or King Crimson is a bit lost? They're kind of adrift, maybe?
It could certainly be, because if you look at it, I mean, they took a considerable break after this record. I mean, in the articles and interviews I've read, it seems to me like Robert thought it was done after Islands. He thought that would be the last King Crimson record, and that would be that. I mean, at that point, I mean, that was the fourth record, and he had put a lot of effort. I mean, fourth record in the span. I mean, Islands is what, 72?
71.
Oh my God. Okay, so they made 4 records in between 69 and 71.
Yeah, it's insane.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and those 4 records, you had the first lineup, you had some of the first lineup helping out to make the second record. Then you had an entirely different lineup for the third record. Then you had another entirely different record for the fourth album.
Yeah.
So 4 albums, 4 lineups in 3 years. So it's kind of insane.
Really insane, yeah.
Like, you don't see that. Well, I've never seen that with any band ever. Even the bands that do go through members and stuff, they don't do it that quickly, where you make 4 albums in 3 years and every record's got a different band on it. So I think he was probably a little tired. And I know at this point, I believe it's when he went off to that strange camp where he lived for a little while on a bunk bed and kind of lost his mind, from what I understand, and learned the art of discipline. So,
oh, okay. So that's where that came from.
Yeah. I don't know the exact details, but it sounds a little to me like he got involved with like a guru type of guy,
Okay.
and then went and lived in his compound for a couple of years. And then probably realized that that was not such a great idea and came back and started making Crimson records again. But yeah, that record, I think he probably kind of knew this was possibly it. And it's got sort of it's a sad sounding record a lot of the time, but
Absolutely.
like in a sort of ponderous, it's very mature sounding, like I feel like it's one of their more mature sounding records, but they made it really, really early on in their career.
Yeah.
And then, it's like Quentin Tarantino and Jackie Brown. Like it doesn't fit where it is, but in the totality of things, it fits great.
Yes.
It doesn't make sense that it was released when it was. Like that record feels like it should have been released at the end of the 70s, sort of after they'd done all the 70s Crimson. So where it falls is odd, but it still works. It's a great record.
It makes total sense that it disappeared under the radar. And
Yeah.
it's only slightly coming back into focus as time goes on. 100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, Matt, what's your 4?
Number 4.
I think I know what it is.
Okay, number 4, Shebang.
Oh, nice.
We're into the mid 1970s now. Totally different lineup.
Yep.
So this one we've got Fripp on guitar, Mellotron, etc. And now we've got Bill Bruford from Yes joining on drums. We've got John Wetton, who I believe had been in the band Family up until this point and before he joined Crimson, and then later, of course, went on to help form Asia.
And UK before that.
That's right. And UK.
Yeah, with Alan Holdsworth.
Yeah, Wetton's a beast.
Yeah.
And then we've got these strange fellas. Jamie Muir. Is it Jamie? Yes, Jamie Muir on percussion and all sorts, it says on here, which is literally the guy's playing saws and wine glasses.
Nice.
And then David Cross. So they got a full-time violinist on this record. And this was my introduction album to this era. This was the first one I heard. It's also the first one they made. And I loved it right from the get-go, but instantly you can tell, okay, this is a different band. This is a different thing. They're doing kind of a different kind of music. It's a different take on prog than what they had been doing for the previous 4 records. So this one came after a break of, it's only 2 years. So this is 73. But that 2 years was Fripp going away to his camp and figuring things out. And then, from what I understand, like Billy Bruford really wanted in King Crimson. So it wasn't even a go, get this guy. He wanted to be in sort of the most forward pushing of the progressive bands, and he thought King Crimson was it. So what you end up with is a very, very peculiar record that sort of, for me, set the tone for many, many years to come. You got the album is bookended by these crazy instrumentals, Lark Tongues and Aspic 1 and 2, which are these long experiments in improvisation, early heavy metal. I mean, that riff from Lark's Tongues might be the most metal thing made up to that point. Like for all of the Sabbaths and stuff, like they weren't writing riffs like that. This da 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 da, just like kicks you in the face. It's so mean.
Is it? Yeah, he's adding in kind of dissonant like intervals, like the flat 5, and
he loves the flat 5 on this record.
Flat 5,
he's playing lots of diminished, even that all of that is all these weird diminished things, and I think he's using the altered in there, and not surprisingly, Fripp's a very competent, well-learned musician. I mean, he's got classical training. You almost wouldn't know it by the notes he chooses, but he's one of those guys that like takes all that knowledge and then intentionally does it the other way. So for me, and the one of my favorite sort of Crimson album or anthems, I love Easy Money. it's the weird time signature, the cool sort of vocal delivery. I always thought it was kind of cool that this came out sort of around the time of Dark Side of the Moon almost, and it's got this out of time money song.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, no, it's
which is kind of interesting. Talking drum, love it. Another instrumental. And then for me, the other two songs, Book of Saturday and Exiles, they're okay. They're not mind-blowing. They're pleasant enough, but they feel to me a little out of place considering what else is going on the record. Maybe Fripp trying to like put something a little bit more palatable on the record, which he usually does. He usually tries to throw a couple of songs that anyone could listen to on a record. But these aren't my favorite of those. I love Easy Money. I love the 3 instrumentals. Those 2 are good, not amazing. Although I do like Robert's strange guitar playing on them. But yeah, it's just such a strange record. There's barely any singing on it, really. And it's weird. There's an out of tune violin going on like half the time. And then there's a guy in the background like breaking a clock. It's really strange. And I mean, Jamie, the percussionist, only lasted this record. He did, maybe a dozen shows with the band. And actually, for the diehards, there's a clip of them doing Lark's Tongue and Aspic on like a Danish TV show. When this record was released, and it's pretty amazing. And Jamie's up there on stage live on a TV show with saws, wine glasses, all this ridiculous stuff. Yeah, all sorts.
Yeah.
And I always show that video to people who question when they're like, Fripp's not that good of a guitar player. He's just making it up as he goes. And like, it's deliberate. It sounds funky, but it's deliberate. He means, and I always show people that video of him playing Lark's Tongues and say, okay, now play that for me. If Robert's no good, play that for me. Because it's hard. It's hard. Tricky, acrobatic kind of business for everybody in the band. Famously, David Cross didn't want to be in the band, which I think is hilarious. Robert basically said, like, no, you have to be. And I'm going to teach you how to play rock music. And David was a trained classical violinist with no concept of rock music whatsoever. So perfect for King Crimson, right?
Yeah. I mean, I do remember watching several documentaries on Yes, and Yes had just finished what's arguably their greatest record, and actually on most lists, the greatest prog album of all time, which is Close to the Edge.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 72. And right after Bill Bruford left, which I think shocked everyone. It's like, you're leaving Yes? Are you crazy?
The height.
The height. Yes,
Yeah.
the height. And I mean, I think in hindsight, it probably was a good move. I mean, because, at the time it was probably insane, but yeah, in hindsight, it was a great move.
Yeah. I think Bruford's he's an odd drummer. He's very, very good, but he's got this sort of like slightly herky-jerky style. It's very unique to him. He's got a lot of jazz elements to him, but he's clearly like a rock drummer. And he just fit really well with what Crimson were doing in the 70s. And I'm not sure he would have fit in all that well with the way Yes went, because Yes kind of went the other way, right? Yes kind of got more palatable and more commercially available to people. And Bruford wanted to go the exact opposite. He wanted to play weirder stuff. And certainly, I mean, he must have been very happy with the results of Lark's, because it's a very strange album.
Yep. All right, cool, man. So, so my number 4, this is part nostalgia, because this is the first Crimson album that I bought.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought 2 Crimson albums at the same time. Very weird albums to get as an introduction to a band, but I think.
How old were you when you got these?
I was 16.
Cool.
Yeah. I had a buddy that I was jamming with in high school, and he wouldn't stop talking about Crimson. So it was his 2 favorite bands were King Crimson and Living Colour.
Wow.
Yeah. So I got into both those bands, and I'm glad he told me about them.
Yeah, thanks to that guy.
So so one of the two albums is an EP called Vroom.
Oh wow, I remember Vroom.
Yeah, awesome cover. And
Hard to get your hands on now.
is it really?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So it's basically kind of it's remixes from Thrak, I think.
Yeah.
And because I heard this first, this is what usually happens. I'm so used to these mixes that when I put on Thrak, I don't like those mixes as much as this.
Right.
Now I don't know if that's just subjective or if these mixes actually are better.
I think they might be better. I'm used to the other ones.
Gotcha.
So I like those mixes, but I'm so used to the other ones that I tend to just listen to Thrak.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was so this is my number 4. This is the album I bought at the same time.
Wow. No kidding.
Yeah. So this is couldn't get 2 more different records to try to get into a band. It was confusing. Like this is
that's 2 different bands you got right there.
Yeah, totally. But I really like this one as well. I still love it. So this is the sophomore album of the band. Also tends to be forgotten just because the first album was so iconic and so important.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say this album has one song, and this is probably why it's my number 4. I think it's one of the greatest King Crimson songs, Cat Food.
I was hoping you were going to say Cat Food, man. I just love that song so much.
Cat Food is so good.
One of my favorite Crimson songs, without a doubt. And for me, makes that album more relevant because it has Cat Food on it, which is such a unique song for them. It almost doesn't fit in their catalog, and yet it also sort of perfectly does because of it's like a pop rock song, but it's got so many Crimson isms in it. The sort of falling down the stairs piano lines, the intentionally out of tune bends and stuff that like lead into things. Such a strange song. Great vocal from Greg Lake, like really great vocal. Just a really killer song. And yeah, for me, I remember getting Poseidon, and my first thought was like, okay, they sort of remade the first record, right? There's a lot of sort of beats that stay the same from record to record. Pictures of a City sounding kind of like Schizoid Man Light. In the Wake of Poseidon sounding sort of like Epitaph, and In the Court of the Crimson King got smashed together. But then Cat Food is this out of left field, where did this one come from kind of a thing. And such a good song.
Yeah. I also love the little interludes. You have Peace.
Yep.
In interludes. And Cadence and Cascade has a little bit of a teaser of was his name Gordon Haskell, I think?
Gordon Haskell, yeah.
Gordon Haskell. So he would be the singer for the
next record,
Blizzard. Yeah. So you're getting a little bit of a sneak preview. I think he does a great job on that song. Yeah,
I prefer like Cadence and Cascade to a lot of their other sort of softer songs. I think it's one of their better ones.
Yep.
And yeah, even the Mars, the Holst thing at the end there.
The Devil's Triangle.
The Devil's Triangle, which is basically just Holst the planets, right? Their take on Mars.
Right.
And I think it might run like 15 minutes or something like that. It's a bit of an album filler, but I find it kind of hypnotic at the same time.
And it actually scared me a little bit. It still does.
It's got a really uneasy thing going. The Mellotron sounds kind of menacing on it. It's just one of those things that King Crimson are very good at like weird vibes. They just know how to hit you in a way where it's like other bands won't hit you like this, but we will. And there's quite a bit of that on Poseidon. I mean, it's a very fractured band at that point, and the fact that they were able to put out a record that's that good, it's pretty impressive.
Yep. And I kind of I feel like this album is a perfect transition between the first album and the third album, because it is starting to get a little jazzy.
100%. Yep.
And psychedelic. I mean, the first album was psychedelic too, but yeah, there is a
it's a bridge for sure.
Yeah, it's a bridge. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool, Maddie. So what's your three?
Well, the next one fits in very nicely. And this will be for Crimson fans. I always get funny looks for this one. I think I've even gotten funny looks from you for this one. It's Lizard.
Nice.
I don't know. Like a lot of people, a lot of Crimson fans put this closer to the bottom. I love this record. I love it. There's weird things about it that maybe I can see how it would turn some people off. But for me, it's kind of like what you just said. It's got this, the psychedelia is bumped up on this record. The jazziness is bumped way, way up on this record.
Yep.
It's still got a proggy vibe for sure, but this is, for me, this is one of the most King Crimson records. It's just they started moving in a different direction, and then it's almost like they doubled back. And yeah, so you got again a completely different lineup on this record. Once again, Robert teaches a guy who does not know how to play bass so he can be the singer bass player. And now this is the point I think that most Crimson fans have contention with, is that Haskell doesn't really fit as a Crimson vocalist. He did a wonderful job on Cadence and Cascade on the second record. He does a wonderful job on a few of the songs on this record, but he doesn't have that very strong, projected, almost holler-like voice of Greg Lake, of Boz, of John Wetton. It's much more a, lounge singer's voice, and it's soft. And so it fits in very strange on this record, but it also adds this sort of weird, creepy quality to it because of the way he sings everything very soft. I would just add really quickly, it is a little goofy. So it is.
It gives kind of a jester,
yes,
vibe, which actually fits the record.
It's the record, right? So the theme of the record is sort of, and you can see it on the album cover here, is sort of a circusy vibe. The first song on the record is called Circus, spelt with a C and a K. And on Circus, for example, his voice sounds fine. But then you get to like Happy Family, starts to get a little, like you said, it's a little goofy, but it's almost like you can hear him singing it with a smile. And so it sort of fits the vibe. And then he only really sings the first 4 songs on the record. So this record has 4 songs. And then the second side of the record is one song called Lizard, which is a, 22-minute jazz opus, progressive jazz opus, maybe. And John Anderson from Yes does the majority of the singing. So when the big, strong voice is really needed, you've got John Anderson, and he does a great job on this. And then for the sort of, like you said, that almost gestury vibe, Gordon Haskell, it works. It's not what you'd expect from Crimson, but it totally works. And those, like particularly Circus is fantastic song, has some of my favorite Fripp guitar work in it, actually. There's a lot of cool acoustic arpeggiation, and then he throws in a couple of very strange, because they're played so well, jazz licks where it's like, wow, Robert's like playing like he means it, and I love that. And interesting side note for for yourself and other producers, this was the first record ever made on a Neve 1070 or a Neve console. The very first one that used like the 1073, the famous preamps and stuff. And this record, I always thought it sounded good. And then when I found that out, I was like, okay, that makes sense. It's got this very like instruments are forward. Everything is right there.
Yeah, the Neve is very forward. It's in your
very, yeah, it just puts everything right in your face. And this record, I mean, the drums are for the era, to be able to hear sort of the ghost notes on the snare the way you can on this record is unusual. I think Andy McCulloch, I believe, is the drummer on this record. Kind of had a Michael Gilesy vibe, very like Mitch Mitchell, just fill a lot, kind of crazy. Everything sounds kind of improv. And so we've got those Circus, which, like I said, probably one of my favorite sort of Crimson songs. Indoor Games, very strange. Got some use of early use of synthesizer happening. Happy Family, which is about the Beatles, which is kind of interesting. The breakup of the Beatles, actually. And then Lady of the Dancing Water, which is your stock soft song, because they had to do one on every record at that point.
Yep.
So you got those four, which are, the first three for me are all solid. Circus is great. Lady of the Dancing Water is nice enough. It's not amazing, but it's a nice little song. And like the instrumentation is just so interesting on this record with the lots of horns. Mel Collins is certainly one of the stars of this record, with his saxophone really kind of guiding the record in a lot of ways. He's almost the lead instrument as opposed to Fripp. And the song Lizard, the opus Lizard, I just friggin' love that thing.
It's a great,
There's all these sort of riffs, if you will, that it just hits so hard, like that whole ba 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 ba. That whole section at the end with the flutes doing these wild runs in between. It turns into this, like, this is the record that when I show people, once it gets to that point in the record, I can see the look on their face where they're like, this is sort of blowing my mind. It's so sensory overload. There are so many things happening. And yeah, it gives me the willies, So for Lizard alone, this makes the top three for me. It's so bizarre. Gordon Haskell is so out of place, and yet it works. I just find it to be it's like a Happy Accident record, you know?
Yeah, this one was competing for my number 5. This one's absolutely grown throughout like 20 years for me. I remember I first heard, I don't know if it kind of shows how old we are. Right? When you went to the record store, you could listen to it. You could preview the album.
Yeah.
And I remember previewing Lizard kind of around the same time I bought these ones, and I hated it. I was like, I'm not buying this.
Yeah.
And that was it for a while. And then, I guess as the internet kind of came up and I kept listening to Crimson, I kept giving this record, tries. I kept trying it out, and I finally stuck. And it's just been getting better and better. I think this album has the greatest Robert Fripp guitar solo, and that's the end of Lizard.
Yes,
when it dies out like that,
man,
his guitar is just tragic sounding, and I love that.
Yeah. What he created a tone there that I think people have been chasing now for years and years. It's such a, because it's like it's drenched in reverb, and yet it doesn't sound that way. It's got this very sort of like tonally and melodically, it's very peculiar. And he loves to sort of play between scales that are already between, you know what I mean? Really keep your ear wondering, what am I going to do? And then you're always wrong. He always picks the thing that you would not expect him to do. But yeah, Lament, I think that's what that little part of the guitar solo.
So this is such a proggy thing. So this is Lizard, part C3.
Part C3.
C3.
Get out of here.
Rupert's Lament. And then there's D, Big Top, which I think
that's literally just a little that they speed the tape up.
Okay, so that makes sense. That's Big Top, and the guitar solo is probably in Prince Rupert's Lament. Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
And it's cool because this is like a 20-minute piece that legitimately tells the story of like a war, a fantasy war, mind you, between like humans and lizards. I believe you've heard me and Davin actually break out into the chorus of this song many times, because for no reason we'll just stake a lizard by the throat, right? But even that chorus is so catchy. You're going through this da, 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 and then all of a sudden it's wake your reason hollow vote. It's so it feels like the Beatles or something. John Anderson doing that part, but it's oh man, it's just such a strange piece of music. For me, it's like way up there in my favorite pieces in the catalog. If I had to pick one piece by King Crimson, this is all you can listen to for the rest of your life. it might be the song Lizard. I mean, for one, it's long, so I got lots to listen to, and there's just so many different things and so many people that get featured. There's long record. It gets very, very close to jazz at points, very close to almost classical music at points, and then every once in a while you're like, oh right, there's singing and stuff in this. But very, I can even remember when we first started hanging out, I mentioned to you that like I loved Lizard, and you were like, Lizard, huh? And I remember I got the same reaction from our buddy Davin, who's another huge Crimson fan. Like, of course he loves it, but it was like, Lizard, you love Lizard? And like, yeah, no, I love Lizard. That's one of the ones for me. And it's because of that final piece, man. And like you said, like Lament, every time it gets there, I'm thinking like, man, what a perfect spot for this. And it's so Fripp too, that weird rounded tone, neck position on the guitar with like the tone rolled off or something, and sustained for a million years. And just such an like sonically interesting, melodically interesting, tons of parts going on. Like there's parts in Lizard where there's got to be 20-25 instruments playing.
Yep.
And just, I don't know, oddly satisfying for me.
Yeah, it's definitely a grower, 100%. Yeah.
Agreed.
All right, so my number 3, you've already said it. I'm gonna go with Discipline.
Nice.
Yeah, it's fairly high up for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a flawless record.
Really is.
It's and I like that when Crimson has a flawless records, because I find that might be their Achilles heel, is that sometimes
there's a couple of throwaways,
and the albums, the songs are a little bit too different. This is absolutely cohesive in every way. Every song fits together, kind of like the symbol here. It feels like a very disciplined recording session.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just I haven't really looked into it, and I should, but the whole single note kind of loopy guitar thing that's going on there, where it sounds like 2 guitar players playing at the same time, and then all of a sudden
one of them plays it a beat late.
Yes.
Yeah.
I you might know this more than me, but is that Fripp and
Ballou
and Ballou playing together, or is that Fripp doing some kind of weird loop thing?
That's legitimately one of them just being like, and now I'm gonna pause for an 8th note and start the riff again, so that we're playing an 8th note off of each other.
That's amazing.
I've seen them do it live. It's fantastic.
That's awesome.
I mean, it's a very hard, and a lot of the time Ballou's got to do that and then sing over it. Like there's times on the record where he's doing that, like playing the note an 8th, literally an 8th note later, in a pretty quick tempo, and then singing over it. And it's just sort of this like muso muscle thing they're showing off. Like, yeah, we can play. And that's actually like a trope that they sort of use on those 3 records that kind of keeps coming back. I think they use it the most on Discipline. Okay. And songs like Frame by Frame, which heavily utilizes that technique, and one of my favorite songs on the record.
Mine too. Yep.
I think one of the things about this, Adrian Ballou was really good for this band, because he came in and really Fripp let his influence play out.
Yes.
As we were talking about before, he had done stuff with I believe he had played with, he definitely played with Bowie. I think he did some touring with the Talking Heads. And who you mentioned another band he was with too.
Zappa.
So, right, Zappa. So yeah, I mean, he came from a place where like Fripp clearly respected him, and you can really hear his influence in like he was writing lyrics and vocal melodies. You could tell Fripp wasn't getting in there and saying like, don't do that, because I mean, a lot of it's very catchy. Ballou's got some really good pop sensibilities. Frame by Frame is a catchy song. It's got great hooks in it. And several of the songs on this record have like legitimate, awesome pop hooks. And that continued throughout the 80s. I mean, I think Three of a Perfect Pair is a brilliant little pop song, even though it's also a full-on prog song. So yeah, and you kind of said it, it's so cohesive. A lot of, you know, Crimson were doing a lot of new stuff at that point. I mean, it's 81. The 80s had just started, and there are synth guitars all over this record. Synth guitars were not really a big thing yet. I think Crimson were one of the first bands to really engage with it, Fripp in particular. And it makes for a very, very unique sounding record. All three of those records, very unique sounding. I mean, you've got these oddly dry drums.
Yep.
Everything in the 80s was super reverby. The drums on these records are not reverby at all. They're very tight sounding, and still incorporating some of the, you know, electric toms and that kind of thing. And then these like crazy clean guitar sounds that almost just sound like the guitar plugged directly into the board.
Yep.
With maybe a little bit of delay on it or something. But it's so like, and yet they still sound like it's the 80s. So they like gone against all the tropes. There's no reverb on it. There's no like big washy reverby vocal, and yet it sounds exactly like the 80s. Which I listen to it all the time and think like, why does it sound like the 80s? And I think the big reason really is Belew. His sensibilities, his voice, that sort of like theatrical way he sings, where everything's got this sort of like almost a comical take to it. You know, the way he sings Elephant Talk, it's all talk. Yeah. He kind of has that on the whole record. And I think this is the record that usually, if I'm showing Crimson to someone who I think is a little scared of them, I show them this.
Nice.
You know, because it's still got all the proggy elements. It's still King Crimson, but super digestible. Lots of hooks, lots of melodies that you can kind of latch onto. And really, for weird songs, I mean, Elephant Talk's probably the weirdest one on it. And it's not that weird, other than it being sort of stream of conscious, you know, talking. That's not that weird for King Crimson. So yeah, it's very, very, I'm surprised it didn't do a little better, if I'm being honest. Like,
yeah,
you'd think that it's got a couple of songs that certainly could have fit on the radio during the time. It's still proggy, so you'd think that the prog guys would be happy to see, hey, and I mean, it did okay, but, you know, for a record as good as it is, it really did go under the radar quite a bit.
That's another really interesting discussion about about prog bands in transitioning into the 80s, because you know, I can see even now a lot of modern bands, they're making prog albums, you know, with like the 70s prog, you know, like elements like the Hammond organ and, you know, the Mellotron and all that stuff, right there. But when these bands like Genesis and King Crimson and Rush, when they were entering the 80s, they were still looking forward, right? Because they were progressive. Like, they wanted to change their sound and use the new technology. And, you know, so that it's like they wanted to change. And I think that's healthy.
100%. It's funny that we go back to like the 70s all the time being like, this is prog. And it's like, well, that was baby prog. Legitimately. That was prog in its infancy. And prog is supposed to move with the times. I mean, that's progressive music.
That's what it means.
So I think it's almost this weird thing where prog got a little lost in the 80s. Like, people didn't recognize it maybe anymore. You know, like, people would hear the new King Crimson say, this isn't prog music. It's like, well, maybe you should listen again, because it's definitely prog music. It's complicated, and the parts are very intricate, and there's all kinds of time signatures and all the stuff you would associate with prog. It's there. It's just wrapped up in a little bit more of an 80s package, which is, you know, there was a certain groove to the 80s. There was a certain sort of clarity in production in the 80s. And yeah, they embraced that stuff, but there's not a Mellotron on those records, right? There's not a note of Mellotron on any of those three records. You don't hear any organs. You don't hear any pianos. It is guitars, Chapman stick, which still don't know what it is. some sort of a bass that I think you play a fret with both hands.
Yeah,
Maybe.
it's called it's also called a touch guitar, I think.
Right, that's what they started calling it when they started adding like 15 strings to them.
Yeah.
Right, and then two of the guys in Crimson were playing them, and it just looked bonkos.
Yeah.
I think when Tony was playing it in the 80s, it was still like just a 4-stringed instrument that you just sort of fret it with both hands. I think I could be wrong about that, but I mean, still just very peculiar, right? Lots of strange guitar sounds.
Yeah.
I love the early guitar synth sounds because they're so sort of cheese ball, but they sound so cool.
So cool.
Because they don't sound like synths, right? They have a synthy sound, but you can tell it's not played on a synth. It's like it's too
glitchy. Yeah.
It's glitchy, and it's sort of like I love the fact that they were like, well, it's a little glitchy, but we're just going to go with it. And those synth guitars are all over all 3 records from the 80s. And then he was also, this is sort of the early stages of when he started doing the Frippertronics, right? That was sort of born with this album, actually, which for people who don't know, Fripp essentially, invented, as crazy as that sounds, the modern loop. There was no looping pedals back then. You couldn't just set a loop and play to it. But Fripp would record these pieces of music on a 2-inch machine and basically then play it back, often in reverse because that's all you could do. But he would intentionally input his parts so that when they came out in reverse, they sounded good, and then he'd play over top of that. Actually, there's a whole song on Three of a Perfect Pair on New Ages that is just Frippertronics. It's just him doing that thing. And if you see live clips of him doing this, like up on stage, basically by himself with a tape machine and a foot pedal, he was doing what modern guitar players are, doing heavily now. I mean, half of Instagram is guys doing this, and he was doing it in the late 70s, early 80s, probably a good 20, 30 years before anyone else was doing this. And he was doing it without the technology to do it. He came up with a way to do it. Sort of like Les Paul and Delay, you know what I mean? He just said, like, what can I use these tape machines for? There's got to be another purpose. So, I mean, just really outside of the box. And there's a lot of that texture just kind of slapped in the background of these 3 80s records of just this weird, probably backwards Fripp guitar being played backwards off of a tape machine. So yeah, sonically, they're very interesting and yet very clean. They're very like clear sounding records. It's almost like it's strange because it's so 80s. And like I said, there's not a lick of reverb. Everything is so present and so right here in the mix. It's, I have a weird affinity for these 3 records. Beat would be the weak one for me. I still like it. Satori and Tangier, Neil Jack and Me. There's some cool stuff on there. But Discipline and Three of a Perfect Pair, I think, are both just absolutely solid, weird pop rock progressive records.
Nice. Yeah. Okay, Maddie. So what's your number 2? Getting there.
Well, I mean, there's really only 2 records I think you can put in the top 2.
That's true.
And we might end up in the same territory here, Jimmy. So number 2, and this was actually a bit of a hard one to pick between, but number 2 is going to be
nice.
Red, which, hot damn, do I like this record.
Perfect album.
Perfect album, man. And I mean, it's really hard. And I mean really hard not to put this one at 1. It's almost a tie for me. I love them for different reasons. And I heard Court of the Crimson King first, but when I heard this record, I loved Crimson at that point, but it really solidified it for me. Because it was like, okay, so they made one great record and then they made some records that I really love that are maybe a little strange. But like you said before, maybe there's some little holes in there that don't make them that complete perfect record. And the great band should have a few of those. And Crimson do. Thanks to Red, so we basically got the same lineup as Lark's Tongues and Aspic. So this is the 3rd record of the 70s era. But they dropped David Cross as a permanent member. So you don't have the violin happening all the time, which for me is good because I felt like Cross sometimes didn't know what to do in that band and he should have just been not playing and instead he was playing. And there was times when I was like, nah, man, stop playing. You don't need to be on this riff. So he's on this record in a couple of spots, but it's much more tasteful. And then this is basically just a power trio record. And man, like, gotta be one of the best trio records ever made. You know, like, it's powerful and it's kind of all over the place. And for me, it's one of the heaviest records of the era, certainly.
Yeah,
it sounds amazing. It's got a really raw sound, similar to like the previous two, but cleaned up a little bit. The guitar tones on this record are crazy good. Mel Collins makes a few appearances. Once again, unsung hero of King Crimson, Mel Collins shows up to add some sax to some songs in just the right spots. And man, there's just not a bad song on this record. And again, what do we got? We've got 5 songs.
well, there's only
Right.
5. Yeah,
5, but it takes up the whole record. I can't remember who it was. A couple of years ago, someone sampled Red, the song Red. And I was over the moon because, you know, just to see some relevance. And I mean, Kanye sampled Schizoid Man, so it's cool to see that they're still in the lexicon. But this record, famously, Kurt Cobain was really into Red, and I get it. You know what I mean? It's got that. I mean, I can see where grunge would like this kind of music. It's sort of an early grungy record. It's mean. You know, the melodies are mean. The attitude on the record is mean. The playing is mean. And then there's these little beautiful sections. Like, I think it's One More Red Nightmare has this like guitar harmony that, like, to me, it just sounds like it should be on Ride the Lightning. You know, it's just sort of like the minor major third harmony, played with sort of the neck position. Everything's sort of really smooth sounding, and it like breaks my heart when I hear it. And then 2 seconds later, we're back into this sort of like, I don't know, or Alice Cooper song or something, you know, this sort of funky, hard rockin', attitude-y thing. And we haven't mentioned this yet. I mean, okay, Billy Bruford, amazing drummer. A lot of people would know Billy. Fripp, most guitar players know of Fripp at least because he gets name dropped a lot. John Wetton is a beast. Plays with his fingers, has a wicked bass sound. Just like one of the most raw, kick you in the teeth rock bass sounds. And on all 3 records he plays on, I think he's just a fantastic bass player and doesn't get a lot of credit for being such a fantastic bass player. And his playing on this record, his singing on this record, I feel like his game just went up. As good as he was on Lark's Tongues and in Starless and Bible Black, he's just so good on this record. The playing, his tone, his singing, I feel like he really found his voice kind of on this record. You don't hear the British hiss in his voice quite so much. And yeah, just like you said, kind of perfect. Oh, and also we get Ian McDonald from the Court of the Crimson King makes an appearance on this record too. So that's kind of cool.
Okay, so my number 2, slightly different than Matt's, but Matt's absolutely right. There can only be 2 albums in the top 2 spots. And I'm going to go with In the Court of the Crimson King. Sorry, 21st Century Schizoid Man.
Court of the Crimson King.
I had
An
it right.
observation by King Crimson.
I had it right the first time. Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously a classic record. This album was always in my house, so I'm very familiar with the cover. I always saw it. Didn't know what it was, kind of scared of it, but
Here's the crap out of my son.
does
He
it?
will not look at the cover of this record. Yeah, I used to have it up on the wall,
Yeah.
and he would run in, scream, "The teeth," and run away.
Wow, the teeth. Yeah,
The teeth. Yeah.
nice. Yeah, so 21st Century Schizoid Man, first song, killer. Probably one of the
Great
coolest
prog
of the
songs
60s.
ever written. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I like all the songs. There's nothing here I don't like. The only reason I don't think this is a perfect album is it's just, I said this last episode. I think it's just
Yep.
a little too quiet, and
Mhm.
especially since it starts off like, whoa, like this
Yeah.
crazy
There
early
isn't a
metal.
follow-up to Schizoid on it.
There's no follow up.
It
And
sort of is left there, yeah.
yeah, and part of me feels like the band is a little, maybe it's a little too moody bluesish.
Yeah.
At points where it's just kind of a little too kind of psychedelic and airy for me. I want this to be a little heavier.
Yeah.
But having said that, I mean, every song is still awesome. So it's kind of a weird. It's more just of an album continuity thing for me.
Yeah.
But that's it. I mean, once that's out of the way,
I think I have the same issues. It's just a matter of like, I wish maybe that, and it's funny because when you hear the, particularly there's the Epitaph box set, which has a lot of this lineup playing live, and
Yeah.
when you hear Epitaph or Court of the Crimson King live, they're heavy. They're these heavier songs. The guitar tones are heavier. The way it's played is heavier, and it makes me a little disappointed that you don't get that performance on the record. But at the same time, it was their first record. It has no business being as good as it is.
No.
So
Yeah, and arguably it's probably one of the greatest debuts of all time.
I think that's an easy one. Yeah. Like top 10 debut records ever. We kind of discussed this in the 1969 video that pretty much everyone was blown away by this record. We don't hear about it the same way because they didn't continue on that way. But when that first record came out, everyone on the music scene was basically ready to quit when they heard this band because they were just so bloody good. And when they played live, they just tore heads off. And there's so many good stories of those, you know, I mean, realistically, it was probably a period of about 7 or 8 months. That was it. Where King Crimson were regarded by people on the music scene, especially over in Britain, as this is it. This is the band that's going to replace the Beatles. This is the band that's going to replace the Stones. This is the best friggin' band on planet Earth. Listen to their first record. It's bloody amazing. And look, watch these guys play, you know, and you could certainly make the argument that Fripp was as good as any rock guitar player at the time. Michael Giles was just as good as any rock drummer at the time. Greg Lake was doing something different as a vocalist. You know, it was this, I mean, to compare him to someone of the age, maybe, oh my goodness, what's his name? Sings Whiter Shade of Pale. He kind of had that kind of voice.
Yeah, the Procol Harum's the band.
Procol Harum, yeah. I can't think of anybody's name, but yeah, like that sort of like really powerful, real projecting rocky voice. I mean, Burden from the Animals, it's kind of that sort of thing too, where it's just this unhinged rock voice, and Greg had it in spades, so powerful. And then was also a sick bass player, you know, really, really great bass player. Ian McDonald is this sort of wizard of instruments, can play everything. So, I mean, they were just such a good band. The raw talent there was so intense. And I think that's a big part of the reason why they couldn't keep it together. Is just too many type A's in the room, you know?
It's too explosive, yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, if you listen to, and you know, in typical King Crimson fashion, I think Epitaph is like a 4-disc sort of Robert's best attempt to capture the live performances of that era of the band. And man, it's pretty overwhelming. It's sort of like what we were talking about with How the West was one, where you all of a sudden, when you hear it live, you go, oh, okay, there's a different power there that realistically, you know, it's a thing that just wasn't really captured in the studio back in the day. You know, it was hard to get across weight. You know, I think that was a big issue in sort of the recordings of the 60s and early 70s, was like, you can tell Michael Giles is playing the crap out of those drums, and yet it sounds a little bit like he's just kind of going bip bop boop beep bop bop boop.
For sure.
Doesn't have that weight, but then when you hear it live and there's all this mic bleed and stuff, you realize like, oh, he's beating the bloody hell out of this drum kit. And Fripp isn't like just he's smashing his guitar. And live again, you get more distortion, you get more intensity. The tempo slips up just a little bit. So there's versions of Schizoid Man where they're doing that prog section and it's too fast, but they're killing it. They're killing it, right? And I mean, that's some tricky business. And I've always found, by the way, the timing in that. And I mean, I'm a professional musician, for God's sakes. And I've always found the timing of that section to just be so bonkos when they're doing the it's like, it's almost like they pause the tape for a second to just throw the timing off. It's so hard to count.
Yep.
But just the musicianship and the fact that they were able to, and this for me is always a big thing, is that they then went out on stage and they did it even better live. Like, this wasn't a band that was like a lot of prog bands sort of putting it together in the studio. This is a band who did this, showed up in the studio, you recorded it and released it. And I think that's one of the reasons Crimson come off a little bit rough around the edges, compared to, like, there was a point where Yes kind of said, like, okay, the studio is our friend. And they started to really use that. And you can hear that those albums, I mean, even Close to the Edge sounds like there was a lot of splicing going on, right? Just for like perfect takes and such. Crimson didn't do that. Crimson, it really felt like they went in the room, they played the song for 12 minutes, and then, you know, went like, okay, let's try it again. And then that time they played it for 16 minutes. Then they did it another time for 9 minutes, and then they went back in and just picked one. You know, like, it's written, it's arranged, but there's also this sort of loosey-goosey, be on your toes, anything can happen element to it. And Court of the Crimson King is, I mean, it sort of stands on its own as just a very peculiar way for a band to start off the career, and an amazing way. Like, very talented guys, songs that no one had ever heard before, in a style no one had ever heard before. And like you said, there's certainly some things, like, I actually listened to the remixed version of it recently, because they did do a remix kind of remaster, and it does bring some of the elements a little more forward. It's a little cleaner sounding. And I dug that about it. And yet at the same time, I missed some of the sort of fuzziness of the whole thing and the almost thrown together quality of it. Even though it sounds so good, it also sounds not that good, you know? It's a funny one.
Yeah. So I'm going to take it this is your number one, eh, Matt?
I might as well pull it out just to confirm.
Right.
There it is.
All right.
The teeth. The teeth.
Yep. Okay, Matt, I'm going to skip to my number one. Obviously, this is pretty obvious, I think, to most King Crimson fans. For me, this is my favorite by quite a large margin. I do like this quite a bit more than in the Court of the Crimson King.
Mm-hmm.
I keep getting the name of the album wrong.
Yeah, no, that's it.
That's it in the Court. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love this album. For me, this is just absolutely perfect.
Different beast.
It's a different beast, absolutely. But it showcases the rougher, the heavier, kind of the less 60s vibe of the last record. This is just a super heavy, dark. I mean, you can even just tell by the album cover, right? It's bleak, it's dark.
Mm-hmm.
And every song is perfect. And it's a perfect. It's just a perfect. I guess average of everything that the band does, right? Like, Red is this crazy, kind of sounds augmented, I think, you know, crazy prog instrumental augmented thing, which they're really good at doing. Fallen Angel is probably my favorite Crimson ballad. I think it's perfect.
Yeah, that's a wicked song.
There's nothing cheesy about it. There's nothing like, oh, is this kind of a throwback to the Beatles ballad?
It's just sort of this, like, you could almost confuse it for like a hard blues, but it's not.
Yeah.
And he starts playing the some augmented or some diminished stuff happens in this one, but it sounds eerie and beautiful and heavy, right? And the drum sound on this, and the way he plays the drums, and then that whole trumpet section at the end, right? over the fallen. Amazing.
Yeah,
And
beautiful.
like,
Beautiful.
it's got this, like, there's a little bit of Black Sabbath in there, and yet it's like, it doesn't have the goofiness of Black Sabbath. It doesn't have the sort of Ozziness of it all. It sounds tougher to me. John Wetton sounds like he smokes too many cigarettes and he's going to take you out back. You know what I mean? He's got a real toughness to him. The drums on this record sound tough. They sound, I mean, for the year, they sound too good. They're so raw and full, and you can tell Bruford's like really putting some extra English on those hits. And then Fripp's guitar tone, so dark.
And you know what? It sucks. Like I was close to putting this on the list as well.
Yeah.
But man, I gotta say, Fripp's guitar sound on this album sucks.
Little thin, James.
Fripp's guitar's tone on this album is like
Fucking killer.
Night and day. Like he
Yeah.
figured it out, right? Like it's,
Big
it's like-
time.
and it's the same with Steve Howe too, right? It's like, guys, just get a distortion pedal. Like just saturate that tone. Like it's so
Yeah.
thin and raspy. It's like, ugh.
Yeah. It
And
felt
frustrating.
like, like on Lark's Tongues and stuff, it really sounded like they were just driving Fenders or something. You know what I mean? It had this sort of reedy,
Yeah.
thin, like, and the thing is with Fripp's playing, it's so percussive.
Yeah.
Much of that gack, gack, that if there's no low end on it, right, it can sound a little funky. Like that's one of my big problems with Lark's Tongues Part 2 is that it's got this riff that just, it's so heavy, but then it's played on this reedy, thin, very unoverwhelming tone that just kind of pulls you out of it a little bit.
It sucks because that's kind of what takes me out of this record.
Yeah.
I will say, I know it sounds weird to say this, but I'm gonna say that I prefer Dream Theater's cover of Lark's Tongue and Aspic Part 2.
Oh, it's quite good actually.
Because John Petrucci really nails the tone.
Yeah, he gets the tone, and
He gets it right.
that's all I've ever wanted to hear out of that song is like someone play it with a thick, like turn a Marshall to 10 and then put a pedal in front of that and really give me a saturated modern guitar sound. And the thing is, like you said, Fripp had that on Red. By the time we get to Red, he's like figured it out. And even a record we haven't mentioned at all, Starless.
Yes.
The one in between Lark's Tongues and Red. That record has a slightly better guitar tone than Lark's Tongues. It starts getting better, and there's some great tunes on that. Great Deceiver. But yeah, when he gets to Red, there's just this clear, he's figured out that tone. And for me, as of that point, I don't think anyone had done a better heavy metal guitar sound. And that's what it is to me. It's a full-blown, fully saturated, high gain, sustain for, well, forever, you know, which he proves on that record several times by just holding a note and it just goes, which became a very integral part of Fripp's sound, is that sort of neck position Les Paul. I can play a note and it'll just go forever with that rounded glassy thing. And on Red, all of it's there. The lead sound is there. The rhythm sound is mean, very saturated. And also, I think he did maybe a little bit more overdubbing on this record. He seemed to have sort of the mindset before of like just the one guitar track. You know, there's only one of me. There should only be one guitar track. Whereas on Red, it's like maybe he realized, okay, it's a 3-piece now. We got to fill more space in the mix. I'm gonna beef up my guitar sound, and I'm gonna do 2 different guitar tracks per song, which allowed for all these wicked harmonies and these really cool counterpoint things that then became a huge part of 80s Crimson. You can almost hear that starting on this record with the sort of long arpeggios played over these cool riffs. And yeah, I think really underrated as a sonic thing is this record. Like, yeah, it's a perfect record. Every song's great. And it's sort of like a lot of Crimson stuff, it did something first and no one even noticed. You know, like Court of the Crimson King, that was first. That created modern prog. and then you had Red, which to me, and I say this all the time, and I get people like, "What are you talking about?" To me, that created modern heavy metal. It's not Iron Maiden heavy metal. It's not it's heavy. It's slow. It's Pantera. It's Metallica when they go that route. It's honestly, I think Sabbath probably heard that record and went like, "Oh, okay." Because I noticed after Red, Sabbath sound like a different band to me. They started incorporating all these sort of proggy elements into their music. All of a sudden, the guitar harmony was a thing, and I never heard a guitar harmony done like that before Red, but I heard it a lot during the 80s. I heard it on every Metallica record. I heard it on every Iron Maiden record after that. I heard it on every Megadeth record. And for me, Fripp was sort of like the first guy to do it. And it's like, well, how are you the first in metal too?
Okay, Matt, I will disagree with you there. I think Sabbath had nailed the metal thing way earlier. And if you even listen to the album Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, that was the more progressive Sabbath record.
Yeah, I can see that.
And that riff on that title track is Tony Iommi playing palm muted.
That's true.
Tuned down a tone and a half.
Yeah,
with dissonant like intervals. For me, that is like, if that is modern metal in that song.
Okay. So I should clarify when I was talking about the modern, I more meant that the leady thing he does on that record. Do you know what I mean? Like when he's doing the harmony parts and stuff, that really sustained, saturated lead tone. That's more what I'm talking about. Okay. So like even on the title track on Red, right? Like that that tone became like the lead sound of heavy metal. That sort of rounded off, fully saturated. That became like Metallica's lead sound. It became Megadeth's lead sound. Although Megadeth, they were bridge pickup guys, but that sort of, it's hard to describe, but that to me became the sort of the lead sound of heavy metal. Whereas Iommi was still doing sort of the, well, I mean, he never really changed his lead sound. Tony, he's always kind of had a similar one, although he did saturate a bit more.
So you could say that Iommi was the metal of, or was the rhythm metal, like pioneer of rhythm guitar, whereas like Fripp was the lead guitar metal pioneer.
Yeah, his that saturation thing that Fripp did, that you could tell he'd been sort of finding for years. Like going back to, you mentioned Prince Rupert's Lament, it's there, right? Yeah. Like he's already doing it. It's just a little reedy. It's a little thin. He hasn't quite found out how to get that full bodied thing out of it yet, but he's still getting that weird rounded high gain sustainy thing happening. And you could tell for records, he was looking for a very specific sound. Actually you even hear it on, in Starless, it starts to form on, if you listen to a song like Great Deceiver, it's got that do. It's kind of there too, where he's dialing it in. But then once you get to Red, all of a sudden it's the full-bodied, fully saturated. I don't know what from what I understand from looking at interviews and stuff, it sounds like he was basically doing the same stuff, playing a Gibson through a Marshall. But I think maybe he was using, there's a pedal actually famously that David Gilmour used that was called the Power Boost. Okay. It was this giant orange pedal, and it was one of the you know what's funny? I'm wearing a That Pedal Show shirt, and they did a whole feature on this pedal where they did, showed off a bunch of modern recreations and stuff. And it was one of the very first overdrives. So not a fuzz pedal. And I have two different versions of it myself now because I bought a couple of the clones, and this thing saturates like crazy. And I got a funny feeling that Fripp kind of heard Gilmour and said, like, I think that might be the missing piece. Okay. And then stuck one of those pedals in front of a cranked Marshall, and Bob's your uncle. You get this just crazy saturation. And I mean, his sustain is unlike anyone else's. Like when he holds a note, you really do get the impression he doesn't even have to wiggle his finger. That thing will just keep going.
So it's funny that he didn't have any of that on his rhythm tone here, which is funny because then it's like he either undersaturates it or he oversaturates it,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
could just be a frip, like just a frippism. Like he likes to go to the
That's the
extreme,
thing.
you know?
You can't know with him is that he might have done it all intentionally. You might go to him and be like, "What's with the guitar tone on Lark's Tongues?" And he might go like, "Well, we worked for months trying to get that sound. We kept getting too much bass in the guitar, and we didn't like all the bass, so and it was too much saturation. Sounded too good. Sounded too good because it almost seems like half the time he's going out of his way to make sure it doesn't.
Yeah.
But on Red, it seems like there was a conscious decision there. It's like this is going to be an awesome sounding record. There's no thin reedy guitars on that record at all.
Yeah.
All the guitars sound good. Still sound like Fripp. They still like have his quality, but they're badass.
And you know what? I do have to say too, I think because metal is just such a staple form of music. It is kind of like a rock pastime to go back. It's like, who was the first metal guy? I very clearly would say that Black Sabbath materialized it, right?
Oh, for sure. Like they were the first band that were obviously a metal band, right? And they were doing the metal thing. For me, with Crimson, it's more of these weird little contributions along the way because they weren't a metal band, right? But they did have very heavy elements, and every once in a while they do something where it's like I almost feel like metal just went like, oh, that could be useful.
Well, because this is what I was gonna say. Like this could be the first. This could be the first heavy metal song on this album, right? I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
I mean that's probably be. I mean, if we could do a whole show just on that. Like,
yeah, that's true.
Where did metal start? And I would say this.
Yeah.
Sure. So it's kind of like, and it's nothing like a metal record at all, right? But that
no, I mean once that first song's over, but I think it's interesting actually because the first song on that record is the only one that really feels like heavy metal in the classic sense, and yet both Epitaph and In the Court of the Crimson King have a heaviness to them.
Yes.
Right. Like in vibe, in presentation, they're very heavy songs. So yeah, I think there's more metal on that first Crimson record than people realize. There's more metal on just about every early Crimson record.
Absolutely.
And for me, Red is probably the heaviest of all the King Crimson records. I totally get the appeal. I mean, and you'll see like guys that reference it. It's often metal guys, or like a guy like Cobain who liked dark, heavy music. I mean, Cobain famously was really a big fan of Celtic Frost, which is random. But he liked dark, weird music, and few things get darker, weirder, heavier than Red. I mean, I feel like it's such a scary, sophisticated, listen to it alone in the dark kind of record.
That's true. And maybe that's where it gets confusing, right? Because when you say the word heavy, it's like there's so many nuances to metal, and exactly like the dissonances, the eeriness, like Red has almost all the elements of metal without coming out and saying this is a metal record. It's not upfront metal, but everything else behind it, all the subtleties. I agree with what you're saying. It's a background metal record. It's a perfect spirit of metal without being metal.
Yeah, it's as the kids would say, it's low key metal.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like on the down low, no one talk about it, but yeah, this is kind of metal.
And there's a band called Glue Log. They're a Canadian band, oh
my goodness, from the 90s,
and they covered Red.
No, they didn't. I remember that band. I can vividly remember they had a video on Much Music, and around 90, I want to say 93, 94, made the countdown.
Yep.
Like a sepia. They did Red.
They did Red. Yep. And so there's two singers. One of the singers played a stick.
No way.
So I mean, you can't be more. I guess like more of a hat nod to Crimson.
Yeah, here you go, guys. Is it glue? Okay, I always thought it was glue leg. By the way, how is it? Glue leg?
Okay, glue leg is how it's spelled. Like, isn't
I don't
that
know if I've ever heard it said. I don't know if I've ever even said it myself. It's such
know
a
what?
blast in the past.
I think I'm just getting it mixed up with a German death camp.
Oh,
Sorry, hang on.
the Gulag and the Gulag.
No, the Russian. Is Gulag Russian? Yeah, it's Russian.
Gulag's Russian, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like Gulag.
Yeah, yeah. I vividly remember that band. Speaking of covers of King Crimson, April Wine do a pretty surprising version of 21st Century Schizoid Man,
Really?
which very surprising because April Wine. What?
Wow.
But it's quite good. So shout out to the East Coast band, by the way, April Wine, for doing 21st Century Schizoid Man, which I heard on the radio one day, and I was like, "What is happening? What is happening?" The guy came on, was like,
Awesome.
"It was April Wine with 21st Century Schizoid Man." I was like, "You got to be kidding me! April Wine?"
So the Canadians love red.
Apparently,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I-
love Crimson. Love Crimson.
yeah, there's a lot of Crimson fans around. I mean,
Yep.
you certainly meet more as a musician than you do just sort of walking around the world. But I've got a lot of friends that are big King Crimson fans, like a surprising amount. I know at least a half a dozen big ones, which is, maybe not a ton, but it's more than I ever thought I'd meet. Our mutual buddy Davin, I can remember he was sort of the first one I met up here in Ontario when I moved up here. And, we were instantly friends on that alone. And then I met you a few days later, and it was a similar scenario where they were one of the first bands we mentioned. Like, I think it was Megadeth, King Crimson, and then the obvious ones like the Zeppelins and such. But particularly when we were both kind of talking like, really like Megadeth. Oh, you like Megadeth? Interesting. Oh, you like King Crimson? It's very specific. So it's one of those bands that when you're into them, it kind of feels like this cool insider secret.
For sure.
They're not everybody knows them. They don't have a ton of name recognition, even though like they've never gone away. I remember being a kid, 12, 13, reading guitar magazines. Fripp was in them all the time. References to that band were there all the time. And I would just be like, who is this King Crimson band? Because I heard everybody talking about them. Remember Adam Jones from Tool, the guitar player, huge King Crimson fan, not surprisingly.
Tool is so influenced by Crimson.
Oh, dude, they're the modern version of King Crimson. They actually did a pretty big tour together. I want to say maybe 10 years ago.
Together, really?
Yeah, it was I believe it was for the Power to Believe record for King Crimson. So like maybe mid-aughts, somewhere around there. And they did a proper tour together, and it was mainly because both Danny Carey and Adam Jones, those two guys for sure, are massive King Crimson fans. Danny Carey, not surprisingly, is a big Bill Bruford guy. And you can maybe make the argument that Danny Carey is sort of Billy Bruford on steroids, really. He sort of does what he does. He just does it with more oomph. And that kind of goes to the Miles Davis thing of, yeah, well, you had me to learn from, right? When you've got a guy like Bill Bruford to listen to growing up, you can be even better than Billy Bruford. When you got Steve Vai to listen to growing up, you can be better than Steve Vai because you started with him, which was a point Miles made very aptly when the new jazz guys started coming around and they could all outplay him. And he's like, yeah, well, they had me to listen to growing up. And it's such a good point, right?
Yeah.
And so Tool were able to sort of take that. They took a certain element, I think, of Crimson and really like ran with it, and certainly there's other influences there in Tool, but there's a mood that was very specific to Crimson that hits very hard on Red that Tool really embraced. This sort of spooky, serious, heavy without being heavy. Like we were saying, like Tool often got called a metal band, often still do. I don't really see Tool as a metal band, but they're definitely like Crimson. They have those heavy elements, distorted guitar saturation, but it's more the mood that's heavy, right?
Yeah, I mean, I go as far as to call Tool prog metal.
Yeah, hard prog rock or prog metal for sure. And they're sort of, for me, they've been, I mean, I always sort of equated them as like the King Crimson, the modern King Crimson. And I looked at like maybe like Radiohead would be sort of the modern version of like a Pink Floyd, where it's progressive, but it's also super listenable. And it's not really about the muso part of it and the flashes of playing, although Crimson aren't super into that. They're not Dream Theater, it's not show off music, which some Dream Theater I would argue is maybe a little show offy.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But yeah, Tool are sort of in that camp where it's not really show offy, but there's enough going on that it's certainly prog music. It's certainly heavy music, and they also skate the line a little bit more, I think, towards listenability. They're not quite as eccentric as Crimson, where you really have to take your time.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Matt, I think we're getting to the end of this one too. So that was a good one.
That was a good one.
Jimmy Wolf Guitar Solo Countdown.